What would you consider the greatest spectator sport in the country today? Would you say it was, what, baseball, basketball, football?
Oh, I think basketball is the largest paid attendance.
It's politics.
And so, Spencer Tracy, as mayor of a New England city like Boston, invites his nephew, a reporter, played by Jeff Hunter, to watch him run for his 4th term because, no matter what the outcome...
This is my last campaign. Adam, the last hurrah.
Political pictures, Hollywood has found, have never been especially popular, and so, actually, there haven't been that many of them. Director John Ford and Spencer Tracy did this version of Edwin O'Connor's bestseller, The Last Hurrah, in 1958. That's 30 years ago. And Ford's bitter distaste for modern political campaigns is still quite relevant. This scene was a kind of broad parody of Nixon's checkers speech of the early 50s.
I honestly believe, speaking in all sincerity, that when people...
But in the picture, Tracy loses to this fellow, which perhaps better than anything sums up Ford's opinion of the new political process. 10 years before, in 1948, Tracy had played a presidential candidate in Frank Capra's State of the Union. Based on the hit Broadway play and co-starring Katharine Hepburn as his wife and Angela Lansbury as his promoter and would-be other woman, at the finish, Tracy retains his integrity only by renouncing his own candidacy and quitting the race.
I lost faith in you. I lost faith in myself. I was afraid I wouldn't become president.
But a decade before that, in 1939, both Frank Capra and John Ford had released political pictures of an entirely different and far more optimistic viewpoint and mood. Ford's touching and mythic version of the early life of Abraham Lincoln, with a brilliant performance by Henry Fonda, evokes the man and his tragic history only by inference, by our own knowledge of what was to come in time for young Mr. Lincoln, as the picture was named.
Ain't you going back, Abe?
No, I think I might go on a piece. Maybe to the top of that hill.
Capra's film, of course, remains probably the first American movie most people think of when talking about political films, that classic fable of idealism winning the day, starring James Stewart. Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. Written by Robert Riskin, as were nearly all of Capra's best films, and co-starring Jean Arthur, Claude Rains, Edward Arnold, and Harry Carey as the kindly vice president.
Mr. President, what happens to me in the morning? I mean, about my having this floor to go on with my babblings.
If the Senator permits this motion for recess, he won't have the floor in the morning to babble with or anything else, unless he's recognized first by this chair.
Uh-huh.
Perhaps the most fair-minded, yet deeply ambiguous American movie about politics was made by Otto Preminger, also based on a bestseller by Alan Drury, Advise and Consent. With an amazing cast, each of them excellent, Henry Fonda as the proposed new Secretary of State, Charles Lawton as an opposing Southern senator, Walter Pidgeon as a partisan senator, Peter Lawford as a carousing senator, Don Murray as a senator with a past, Burgess Meredith as an informer, Franchot Tone as the president, Lou Ayres as the vice president, Gene Tierney and Inga Swenson as Washington wives. But try to avoid the colorized version. It's bad enough you're not seeing the original widescreen framing for which Preminger was justly famous.
You're one of the great presidents, Russ. Well, if you think so, that's almost as good as history.
Maybe the one American picture that plays most directly to some of our more skeptical attitudes about politics and politicians was the first film directed and written by the most iconoclastic comic talent ever to work in Hollywood, Mr. Preston Sturges. It's called The Great McGinty. It's the story of an out-of-work bum, played by Brian Donlevy, who gets paid to vote in a local election. For good measure, he votes 37 times, and eventually becomes alderman, then mayor, then governor of the state, all underhandedly, and at the finish loses everything because of one moment of honesty. Sturgis's delightfully subversive point, of course, is that honesty is disastrous for a crook.
No bridges and no buildings that the people don't need from now on.
The people? Are you sick or something?
I feel fine.